Hoi hoi, it's louisity again, and for this video we are going to talk about the disappointing reads that I read in 2023. Now, it would be kind of ironic for me to say hoorah because, it's all about disappointing reads that I read in 2023, the books that didn't really hit the mark. There have been books that didn't really make it to the 3.5 passing rating. So far, like, my 2023 has been kind of like up and down, and in my reading, there have been books that haven't really been that great, or at least even good. Like, some of them have like some good things going on. That's why I gave them still like 3 stars, like 3 flat over 5 or 3.25 over 5. But, I guess maybe there are just some years where, some narratives don't work for you, some stories, some books just don't, some novels. But anyway, I only rate novels. I don't really rate collection of short stories that much, unless if it is something like Let It Snow by John Green, Maureen Johnson, and Lauren Miracle, which I did give a rating. And yeah, like, I don't rate nonfiction. So all of these are like novels, at least as far as I remember. Throughout this year, I only read like novels or like some graphic novels as well. I think there's one here that is more of like a graphic novel or like an online or a digital comic. So yeah. And yeah, basically, it's one of those years wherein I have a handful of it compared to the other years where relatively my reading has gone really well, although there are still some amazing reads that I had this year, which I'll be talking about in another video for the great books read in 2023. So let's get started talking about the disappointing reads. There are 3 books that got like 3.25 out of 5 this year from me, and I'm going to be ranking them. Now, the tiebreaker would be the average Goodreads rating. So first would be Pumpkin Patch Princess by Julie C. Dow. Now, this is like the first ever Julie C. Dow book that I read. And I read this in Wattpad, like the website itself, because it was still there. And follows the story of this kingdom where they're sort of like a fairy tale, and there's like some Cinderella references and all that stuff. And honestly, the magic system wasn't that clear. It wasn't like that enchanting. I did feel like there were some understandable parts. You can feel some of like the tensions going on, some of the jealousy and all that stuff, and a little bit of the drama, that kind of like unleashed like emotions out of you. But it wasn't enough for me to give it a passing rating of 3.5 or above, just because it was so like dragging, and it wasn't really that memorable. It wasn't that captivating. So yeah, and by the way, the average rating for this is still quite high. It got 4.43 average rating in Goodreads. So yeah, but for me, this book was just, it wasn't it. And the next book that got a 3.25 out of 5 rating, which also got an average Goodreads rating of 4.29. And I was really hoping to like this one and basically the rest of the series, because I really liked the 4th book, or like the book before this one. And I'm talking about the 5th book in the Shatter Me series, called Defy Me by Tahari Mafi. Now, unfortunately, I didn't really like this one. I have a reading vlog of it, of my reading experience. And like I said, not only that, because I like Restore Me, I was expecting for this to be like something that I would love or rave about. Like, basically the series is something that I'm going to be raving about. Every time I'm filming reading vlogs, I always get into hoping that I'll have a great reading experience, or at least a good one. And unfortunately, this one didn't cut it. I felt like the story focused more on Warner and Juliet, or Ella's kind of like telepathy thing going on. There is some perspectives of Kenji here along the way, but I felt like the scenes were a little bit more narrow. Like, the world was like small. That has been like my concern with like the Shatter Me series, in terms of like the first book. I felt like the world is so small. It's like it's not fully developed, it's not fully flushed out, and I felt like we were going back to that phase again, and I felt like that's very unfortunate. What else? Yeah, and I mean, there were likable scenes here. There were times when emotions were unleashed to me, but it wasn't like enough for me to like say that it is enjoyable, because I felt like we keep on like trying to understand like the psyche of the characters, or like what's going on in their minds. And maybe for some people that are looking for just simply character driven narratives wherein they're just exploring about what's in their mind, because the thing is, for me, like that's okay to explore like the thought process of a character if it will make sense about how it's going to be impacting like the entire narrative. And sometimes that's not the case, and maybe that could be the case for this one, but in terms of like the world, it was really small. Like it was, I don't know, like it wasn't really fully developed, and it lacked like the political intrigue that it had during like the past couple of books, like in Imagine Me, and as well as in Restore Me, which is still like my favorite in the series. But yeah, I was expecting the series to go way more uphill, and it went downhill, which I'm going to be talking about later. But I'm going to finish first talking about the books that got a 3.25/5 rating. And the last book that got a 3.25/5 rating would be Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, this got a Goodreads average rating of 4.22, and this is like my first ever Taylor Jenkins Reid, word pun. But yeah, unfortunately, it didn't really work out. It wasn't really a good one. So yeah, and I know this is a beloved one, of course. And like that kind of makes me think about my reading tastes. I mean, I kind of like had this feeling like since years ago that my reading tastes are kind of different, but I mean, it is what it is. So I mean, it's not really a bad thing, y'all. So, but when I read this story, I listened to it and I really tried like absorbing the words, because and here's another thing about me whenever I read books, like in general, I kind of like have this sort of visualization. And I know like another booktuber mentioned about like how sometimes when one reads are kind of like as if they are watching a movie, and that's kind of like a thing for me. And the thing about this is like I'm the one who's creating the scenes, and there was something about this, and probably even some of the books wherein I wasn't really getting anything out of, is that I couldn't like visualize it. It's like the way that it was written, or synthesized, it wasn't something where I can have a visualization and I can really sort of see it. And kind of like that's when they say when they can be in the narrative. It's like, hey, here's the narrative, and then like you're able to like see through it or see it, and that's when you get to really enjoy the story. But sometimes what happens is like narrative, and like something about like an invisible wall that's kind of like not letting you be immersed into that narrative. And sometimes that's like what happens with some of the books that I'm reading. Like I'm like, okay, what's happening? Or like, okay, this is what happened. Like, and there were certain scenes where I was feeling it, but like there were certain scenes where I wasn't really being able to visualize it. And even like the way that the flow went, it was quite confusing. Like I don't know, like what was, like where did we last stop, or like what happened to the previous one, and then where are we now? Like the direction is vague for my reading experience, and maybe it's because I listened to it in audio and it wasn't really the best audio, honestly. So yeah, so I tried listening it, and then it wasn't really the best audio, so I did like listen to it really attentively to the words, and I still wasn't able to like grasp like the narrative. So unfortunately, my reading experience wasn't good. The next would be the book that I gave 3/5 stars, and that would be Imagine Me by Tahari Mafi. Now, unfortunately, to me, this series just like went from like I have a reading vlog of this one as well, and the reason why I gave this 3/5 stars is just like my complaint with Defy Me. The world is small, but like in this case, I felt like this was like smaller, and it really just focused on a lot of like just amongst them and nothing really that much. I felt like this is already finale, and the reestablishment is already like doing something, and I felt like I was expecting for really the action packed. It's like this is a dystopian or even a fantasy, but I guess maybe this was a more of a romantasy, I guess, or dystomance. I even said that like in one of my reading vlogs that maybe this is like a dystomance kind of like novel. Just because I felt like in terms of finale, the stakes was like the stakes weren't really that high. The stakes weren't really that high, you know. Like throughout the story itself, yes, it started like really like this, and then like the stakes got higher, but like in terms of finale, it came up short. Like it was a decent story per se, but for a finale, for like a dystopian, or even whether you even consider this as like a fantasy story, it just didn't live up. Like, and honestly, like the transition, like you started like they already had a problem. Like what happened right after like that birthday? Like in Defy Me, it ended with like Warner's like birthday, like his first ever like birthday party, and then like we see this they were trying to escape, and like I'm like, okay, all of a sudden like this happened. Like I felt like I could just like simply read this and like consider it as like a standalone, and like that's it. But like it was a decent story, but not decent enough in terms of like how to end the series and how to make like dystopian novels. So yeah, fortunately gave it like 3 out of 5. Now for some people, I know three out of 5 is still a good rating. To me, 3 for me is like I see the goods, I like it, but sometimes I feel like I feel torn, I feel like shredded inside. So yeah. The next would be something that I gave 2.5 out of 5 stars, and that would be Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover, which received an average rating of 4.08 stars. By the way, for Imagine Me, it got an average rating of 3.99, just in case I didn't say it. But anyway, now with this one, I felt like towards the beginning, especially on like, what was her name? Like was it Lyle, I believe? Like, if you've been watching my channel, y'all know that I'm kind of bad with names. But anyway, with Lyle, like, or the female main character, I felt like a lot of her chapters just involved like smut, and like that's it. Now, some people may be enjoying that part of the narratives or of story or of a novel, like that's what they're targeting for. In my case, I felt like, in terms of smut, there's got to be a little bit more exploration, but I felt like that was just like it on those chapters, and most of the chapters. In terms of the guy's perspective, there's a bit of an exploration of like their characterization, about like why they came up the way that they are. That's why there was still some enjoyment to a certain extent, but I felt like, oh my goodness, I felt like this wasn't just captivating, it was just that part. Though towards the end, the part where the guy was like letting go because now he sees like his former lover, moving on and having the best time of her life. Like I think if I get it correctly, like basically the main guy in this story like still trying to move on with like his high school sweetheart, and like so many tragic things happened to them like along the way, which was really sad. That's why I still kind of like enjoyed it towards like the end, and how the guy is going to be like moving on, and will be dedicated and like loving like our main female character. But yeah, throughout the story it was more of like smut, so like yeah, it was like ugly chapters, pun intended. So yeah, the next book is something that I gave 2 out of 5 stars, and it's actually like a graphic novel, and it has an average Goodreads rating of 4.15, and that would be Sari Sari Story by Carvick. Now this is like a graphic novel that I found from penlab.inc, so Shout out to Kumu, I love you. However, this like graphic novel, while it is cute and has enjoyable elements in it, a lot of the chapters or a lot of the episodes were like hanging. Like it was like it seemed like it wasn't like fully like finished. Like I don't know if it was trying to do some cliffhangers, but like the way that if there is that part where the author was trying to go for a cliffhanger, it wasn't executed well. I felt like I was reading an episode and I'm like, okay, so this is it. Like, what's gonna happen next? And then when we move to the next episode, it's like a whole different thing. So there are a lot of scenes that were kind of confusing, and in terms of like its cohesion, it was like no, there's nothing. It was like posts wherein there are no bridges that like connecting them, or like if there are any like bridges, it's more like an unfinished like bridge. So I was disappointed, reading this one. I'm still gonna give, some of their other graphic novels a try. I'm referring to penlab.inc, and I hope so that there will be some greater ones. So yeah. Another book that I gave 2 out of 5 stars, and its average Goodreads rating is 3.82. It would be White Book, or The White Book by Han Kang. Now, Han Kang is the one who wrote The Vegetarian, and y'all know how much I love the quirkiness of The Vegetarian, the way that the narrative was. But this one is, very bizarre and not in a good way. I was reading this and I was like, what was happening? I felt like the vibes in it, but like that's just it. I think there were some parts where, okay, I'm kind of getting the essence and all that, but all that I'm like, okay, what is this? This is just too bizarre for me. And I love The Vegetarian, and I'm hoping that, Vegetarian is like something that's really great. So I'm about to reveal the worst book that I read this year, and probably one of the worst books that I've ever read in my entire life. And if you've watched my mid-year like check-in tag or mid-year freak-out tag, whatever you want to call it, now you probably know the answer, and that would be The Siren by Kiera Cass. I'm like, okay, it started out really lovey-dovey, but it's like, what is happening in here? It was just like, I felt it was nothing. It was just a bunch of like exchanges, and listen to this, and maybe that's another thing. Maybe that wasn't really the best like reading experience, but like just the narrative itself. It was like, I felt like I was reading Twilight, and y'all know how I feel about Twilight. And I'm like, no, this is one of the worst. And like, it's unfortunate that I started my year, or the first book that I read for 2023 was like a really bad one. Like I gave it like 1.25, and the average Goodreads rating is kind of low for it to be kind of like a quite popular book, because I know Kiera Cass is kind of popular. Like its average Goodreads rating is 3.70 or 3.7. So yeah. So Siren by Kiera Cass is the worst book that I read in 2023, and one of the worst books that I read in my entire life. So that just kind of like ties with Twilight, which has like a lower average Goodreads rating. So as of this moment that I'm filming. So let me know down in the comment section below, what are some of your disappointing reads, or what were the worst books that you read this year? Feel free to comment down below if you want to share or talk about them, if you just want to. And if you've made it this far, leave a bell emoji, or like this sort of like alarm or sound bell something emoji, whatever you want to call it. And I hope you folks liked this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Also, click that subscribe button and hit that little bell icon somewhere down there to keep yourselves posted about my videos. And also put down links and handles on my social media accounts, so feel free to check me out and follow me there and support me there as well. As always, thank you super much for watching. Always be thankful and unleash the reader in you. Bye, y'all. Mwah.